As long as there's a red light on, it's fine, right?
Yeah, the red light is on.
Thank you. Well, when I thought about storytelling, I went through my repertoire of personal stories and began to realize that when one tells a personal story, it's not necessarily the true story, because one tells a story from one's own perspective. And this year I discovered that some of the stories that I was living by actually weren't the real story, that I was under illusion, and that my version of facts was not factual. So I decided, in the interest of preserving my ego, or not preserving my ego, I wouldn't tell a story about me, that rather I'm going to tell a story archetypally that people are familiar with, but perhaps this is a different take. So I have some props with me. And it's a story about light, it's a story about seeing. And rather than tell the version that everybody knows, I want to tell my own version. So I have some characters. And this is a shepherd. It's a shepherd. He's got some sheep, in fact. Let me turn back the bag so you don't see Whole Foods. He's not a Whole Foods bag. and the sheep didn't come from Whole Foods either. So there is a number of these sheep. And so I'd be happy to pass around my shepherd and the sheep, and you can get to look at him. And I thought about the shepherd, and the shepherds, of course, in the Christmas story. And what do they represent? In a way, they represent ordinary life. They represent people who are satisfied with the sheep and chasing after the wolves and getting a paycheck and survival issues. So shepherd consciousness is about survival consciousness. And so when I think about the shepherds, there's a whole crew of them, of course, in the Christmas story. We don't know how many there were. Nobody was there, so we don't know. We don't even know if there were any shepherds. Here are some more sheep, though. I'll pass around my little sheep. And the sheep, of course, are mutton-headed. And mutton-headed sheep, what do they know? They're obstinate, they have their own way of doing things. So even the sheep have a role in the story. And there's no sequence to the story. I don't have things in a particular format. But next on my list, oh, here's another shepherd, and he's got his rod. And again, you can see, he's losing some stuffing, you can see that he's preoccupied, his whole life is about the sheep. Then I have some glorious figures. I absolutely love these three. And these are the three kings. And again, there are many versions of this story, and we don't know if there were kings, if there were magi. We don't know how many there were. We really know nothing at all, except that there were spiritual seekers who basically were seekers after truth and left behind everything to find something they didn't have. And so when I look at these figures of three kings, or the Magi as they are known in the Christmas story, what they represent to me are people in search of consciousness. That they're not happy with ordinary reality. There's something missing. There's some star they want to follow. And so it is then that they go on their journey at great personal risk. And whether they are mythical or whether they were literal, we don't know, we can't prove, we weren't there. But they make a wonderful element, I think, for the Christmas story about people in search of light in a world of darkness, using darkness in the sense of evil, because the whole idea of darkness, it can have a very positive side too. But when you have people seeking the light of truth in a world of moral darkness, then I think that's a wonderful component to the story. Moving on, we have the donkey. And again, the donkey for me represents a sort of mundane kind of living. And we all are fools in our own kind of way. Perhaps foolishness is embodied in the donkey, whether we're Pinocchios or who lose our humanness and become foolish at times. But anyway, the donkey seems to have a function in this story. There is also, of course, the Holy Mother. And so the Great Mother, the Holy Mother, the one who is worthy of bearing the Holy Child. And so in a world given to darkness, we need people who are light bearers. And I think about the need for the light bearer in all of us, regardless of our religious affiliation, if we have one. But somehow to be a light bearer, to be pregnant with word, to be pregnant with light becomes very important. And so an important role in the story, of course, is actually the spouse of the light bearer. He's also dressed as a shepherd, perhaps Joseph went round earlier, and this is another shepherd. I'm not quite sure. The shepherd is not supposed to have been instrumental in the birth, but basically the idea is then that the figure, I think this is Joseph here, right? This is the shepherd, and this is Joseph. So Joseph is needed to show the virgin birth. And whenever we have somebody of great moral or spiritual significance born, there is something very special about that birth. So whether it's Moses, or whether it's Romulus and Remus in Rome, or whether it is the Buddha. The Buddha, of course, there's a story about his birth, and he was born, took 7 steps at birth, right, and said, this is why I came into the world, so he could even speak at birth. But there's a need to point out that the Holy Mother is the one who is the bearer, and the spouse is there as a support and a protector. So we have the protector here. And then, of course, we come to the Holy Child. And, no, there's a sheep, I'm sorry. I don't want to get the two confused. The Holy Child just fell out of its wrapping. But it has a little manger, and it's... you can put them on the floor, that's fine, thank you. So we have the Holy Child, and basically when we think about consciousness and finding truth and finding light, it's in becoming like the little child. It's letting go of the ego, it's being born again, it's going back to that child consciousness that is before birth, that we then have to recover as adults. And so the human journey, it seems, is to become not childish, but childlike, and to leave behind persona that we have, public persona, to leave behind all our self-importance and all the things that make us look good, and instead to return to that childlike consciousness. And that's what the Holy Child is all about. So I haven't told the story in a religious way, a faith perspective. I haven't told it in a literal perspective, but I've told it rather through references to light, to darkness, to consciousness, to truth, and to our calling in life to be spiritual seekers. So that is my story, that's my contribution. Thank you.